finding life difficult. Workmen were mending the viaduct on the main line. The arches needed strengthening. The Fat Controller did not want to close the railway while the work was done, and so repairs took a long time. The engines had to take great care when crossing the viaduct, and the delay often made them late on their journey to the junction, where they knew Thomas would be ready to collect his passengers. Thomas grew crosser and crosser. "Time's time," he grumbled. "Why should I keep my passengers waiting, while Henry and James dawdle about all day on viaducts?" "Don't blame me," snorted Henry. "If we hurried across the viaduct, it might collapse, and then you'd have no passengers at all. What would you do then?" "Run my train on time, for one thing," retorted Thomas. He hurried away before Henry could answer. Bertie was impatient too. He was timed to arrive just after Thomas. His passengers found that instead of going straight from the bus to their train, they were kept waiting till Thomas arrived. Soon Bertie grew cross with Thomas. "Late again," he remarked, as Thomas panted wearily in. "We may be friends, but I thought you could go fast, Thomas. It's time we had another race. I reckon I could beat you now." Thomas let off steam loudly. "Rubbish," he hissed fiercely. "It's those main-line engines. They dither about on their viaduct and then blame the Fat Controller's workmen. It's just an excuse for laziness, if you ask me." One day, James was later than ever at the junction. "I'm sorry, Thomas," he puffed. "I was held up at the station, and the viaduct made it worse." "It's lucky for you I'm a guaranteed connection," grumbled Thomas. Before James could answer, he puffed importantly away. At last. That's good, puffed Thomas, and Annie and Clarabelle ran happily behind. Suddenly, Thomas began to feel a pain in his boiler. Steam began to hiss from his safety valve in an alarming way. "There's too much steam," said his driver. "Oh dear," groaned Thomas, "I'm going to burst! I'm going to burst!" They damped down his fire and struggled on. "I've got such a pain! I've got such a pain!" Thomas hissed. They stopped just outside the last station, uncoupled Annie and Clarabelle, and ran Thomas, who was still hissing fit to burst, on a siding right out of the way. While the guard telephoned for an engine inspector, the driver found notices in large letters, which he hung on Thomas in front and behind. "Danger! Keep away!" Soon the inspector and the Fat Controller arrived. "Cheer up, Thomas," they said. "We'll soon put you right." The driver told them what had happened. "So the feed pipe is blocked," said the inspector. "I'll just look in the tanks." He climbed up and peered in. Then he came down. "Excuse me, sir. Please look in the tank and tell me what you see." "Certainly, Inspector," replied the Fat Controller. He clambered up, looked in, and nearly fell off in surprise. "Inspector," he whispered, "can you see fish?" "Gracious goodness me, how did the fish get there, driver?" "We must have fished them from the river with our bucket," replied Thomas's driver. "Well, Thomas, so you and your driver have been fishing, but fish don't suit you. We must get them out." They all took turns at fishing in Thomas's tank, while the Fat Controller looked on and told them how to do it. When they had caught all the fish, they had a lovely picnic supper of fish and chips. "That was good," said the Fat Controller. "But fish don't suit you, Thomas, so you mustn't do it again." "No, sir, I won't," said Thomas sadly. "Engines don't go fishing. It's too uncomfortable." It was 2 days before Christmas. Many children were expected on the island of Sodor. All the engines were busy with the final preparations. The Fat Controller wanted this year's carol party to be an extra special celebration. The Fat Controller was now waiting impatiently for Thomas. "Quickly now," he said, "our Christmas tree has arrived just in time. I want you to fetch it, Thomas. Duck can look after Annie Faribault until you get back." "Will we be able to sing carols too?" asked Thomas. "We'll see," promised the Fat Controller. It would be nice to sing carols again, sighed Thomas, as he set off on his important mission. Thomas collected the tree safely, but large snowdrifts lay ahead. "I mustn't be late," he thought. "The Fat Controller is relying on me." Whistling bravely, Thomas tried to move, but he couldn't. There was worse to come. Poor Thomas was snowed under. Meanwhile, the other engines waited and waited. They were grumbling about Thomas for being late. "Silence," said the Fat Controller. "Thomas left the works safely, but snow has brought the telephone lines down. We must assume he is stranded." The engines now felt sorry for Thomas, and cold but confident, the twins set off to the rescue. Suddenly, they came to a drift that was deeper than the rest. "Hush!" said Donald. "I can hear something." "Probably the wind," said Douglas. "No, listen," insisted Donald. "Over here." "Look, it's Thomas. Come on, the poor wee engine must be frozen to the frames in there." When the workmen arrived, it took some time to decide how to dig away the heavy drifts of snow. Thomas's driver and fireman, who had taken shelter at a nearby cottage, joined the rescue. At last, Thomas and the precious Christmas tree were freed from the snowdrift. Then they set off once more to finish their long journey. At long last the rescue was complete. Percy took the tired workmen home. Terence said goodbye to Mrs. Kindly and promised to take care of her cottage as he watched them all set off. The engines made good time. No more snow had fallen, but the yard was dark. Thomas's heart sank. Suddenly, all the lights went on. What a marvellous sight awaited Mrs. Kindly. "Well done," said the Fat Controller. "I'm really proud of you all." Mrs. Kindly especially thanked the smaller engines. "Thomas and Toby are all friends," she said. "And now, Percy, you are my friend too." Percy was very pleased. "3 cheers for Mrs. Kindly," he called. "Peep, peep, peep." They all whistled. "We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year." Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends thought it was the best Christmas ever, and Mrs. Kindly could think of nowhere she would rather live than here with them on the island of Sodor.